The Fearless Podcast. In a time of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. All right, y'all. Welcome back to the Fearless Podcast. This is episode 45. And before we get started, I have an awesome guest. But before we get started, I want to shout out today's sponsors. I want to notify everybody that's local. For local pickup, we still have 1 quarter of beef left. So check out thetexasboys.com. Reserve that last quarter if you're interested, and are available for local pickup in Mount Pleasant, Texas. So that's our first sponsor. Second sponsor is Exit and Build Land Summit 4. We went last year. It was an awesome event. I'll put the links down below. John Bush has put together a great just a great meeting. Joel Salatin's going to be there, Mike Adams, Jack Spirko, lots of awesome speakers. Got a lot of great information last year. So those links will be down below. And then lastly, foodforestnursery.com. They sell bare root fruit trees. Now is the time to buy and plant bare root fruit trees. If you use the Texas Boys 10, you'll get 10% off. And that's our sponsors for the show today. All the links will be down below. So please check them out. We greatly appreciate them. And without further delay, I want to welcome Charlie from Yanasa TV. And me and Charlie have been kind of trying to make our schedules work. And I appreciate him taking the time to talk to y'all. Hey, Charlie, how you doing today?
Pretty good. How are you doing?
Great. So I wanted Charlie on. I think he has a very interesting story. And when you're in this farming, ranching, homesteading community, so to speak, this homestead tsunami that Joel Salatin talks about, I love interviewing people that are part of this tsunami, because we started our adventure 10 years ago by relocating to Texas, and it's so neat when you get to hear other people's stories, and a lot of them that started around the same time, and we have a lot of overlap and interest. So Charlie, maybe we could kind of start out with your origin story, you and your wife, like what your backgrounds were, and then what you're doing now.
Yeah. So my wife and I, we met back in 2012. I think we were married in 2015, and we had both had corporate careers in opposite spectrums. I ran a commercial real estate firm up in Raleigh, North Carolina, and she was in financial advisory down in Southern Pines, North Carolina. So we both grew up having farms in our families at some point in time, and we wanted our kids to be able to have that type of life as well. So we bought a farm kind of centralized between the two places we worked. And it had an old farmhouse on it, so we had to completely rebuild it. And that's kind of what brought us out to the country. It wasn't to get into homesteading. It wasn't, any of that. We just wanted to have the land, to have the recreation for the kids. We, rode horses, four-wheelers, that type of thing. And then what happened was shortly after we began work, we got hit with several things that completely changed our lives. My wife got pregnant with our youngest and was put on bed rest. And so she was stuck inside this camper on our farm pretty much for several months until he was born. And then I ran into a problem with our contractor on the house and had to take over as a general contractor. So I couldn't operate a business up in Raleigh and handle our farm, which was 45 minutes away, and operate as the GC. Plus we had to get the house done pretty quickly. So we both ended up leaving our jobs because of that situation. We eventually got the house done after about a year of renovations and moved into it. But that whole scenario changed our career paths. We had to kind of reinvent ourselves. And having a real estate background, I had gotten into agricultural property sales, and we would go out and create elaborate videos on farms to try and, sell the farms to other farmers. And from that, we started getting calls to go out and film rodeos, agricultural events for the state and things like that. And that just kind of took over. We fell into that career path up until about COVID, and then COVID just shut everything down. And along that journey, we grew in our knowledge of agriculture because we were around it constantly. We were filming it. We had to become intimately familiar with farming practices, and we started transitioning our own farm from recreational purposes to actually creating our own food, having animals, chickens. And so, once COVID hit, it started to really kind of sink in that we can't depend on our supply chain anymore. I mean, we have to be prepared ourselves. And for us, we were actually in a fairly decent situation by the time that happened. But for a lot of other people, they were just coming into the knowledge of how fragile the supply chain actually is. So the other thing that we noticed happening around that same time frame is there was a lot of uh, negative narratives being thrown out against the agricultural industry as a whole, farmers, homesteaders, and a lot of that goes back to animal husbandry practices, climate, whatever it is that they could throw at us. It felt like that narrative was coming out, and it was being put out there by nonprofit organizations. They were getting funding through grants and special interests. One of the big cases I can remember back then was the hog farmers in North Carolina. It was real easy to go after them because they supplied Smithfield, and nobody liked Smithfield Farms because it was bought out by China. But what ended up happening was a bunch of nuisance lawsuits came in, put generational farmers out of business because they could no longer operate. And a lot of the funding that was going into those nuisance suits was actually coming from their competition, which would be the at that time, stuff like Impossible Burger, Beyond Burgers, the same investors that you saw investing in those that were trying to take those companies public at the time were then turning around and also using their funds to fund these groups that would go in and basically sue and shut down their competition. So
all fair, yeah.
I mean, and you've continued to kind of see that unfold. I mean, there's 5 or 6 cases that I can mention today where you're seeing the same thing happen throughout our country. So we wanted to, we couldn't film because COVID shut everything down. So we decided to start our own nonprofit to go out and tell the truth about agricultural and farming. And since that time, we put out a farm series. That was kind of the first thing we did, where we traveled around. We covered about 8 or so different farms in the Midwest and the East Coast. And then for the last several years, we've been working on a larger documentary where we've filmed across the US and Canada, filming the American bison. And the reason why we're doing that is because if you want to understand how our ecology evolved and the importance of having ruminants and ungulates on the land, you have to understand, one of the keystone species of North America, because that's pretty much what built our ecology, that the massive amount of bison. And, with that documentary, you do learn a lot about ruminants, their impacts on our environment. But the other thing that we've learned in filming it is how, the agricultural industry side of the bison community actually helps with the conservation side and the indigenous American side. And you really see with that particular group, we call it the bison community, because they see themselves more of a community than different entities, how they all have worked together to basically take a species that was on the brink of extinction and turn it back into over 500,000 today. I think the numbers were getting pretty high before the drought. But so it's an amazing story of seeing how these different groups of people have worked together. But it also helps you understand the importance of having a system that is economically sustainable behind all of that to help, the bison come back. So it's some really interesting stuff we've been learning over the years. And then on top of that, we've been growing our own farm and our homestead and developing our own knowledges, as far as that goes. My wife is making all sorts of stuff out of dairy in our fridge. I call them science experiments, but
that's great. It's so important too, because what you're doing is preserving history what gets lost in this kind of postmodern technocratic, whatever you want to call society now, is, this land of opportunity. The reason it was such an opportunity was we have this large landmass with such a diversified regions, from desert to meadow to high desert, and the heartland, and where all of this food production historically has been coming from for our country, is because of the previous infrastructure, which it wasn't warehouses and trains and all these different things. It was the natural systems that God created. He creates this dirt and grass, and then he puts these animals on it. And then as you start studying holistic management or regenerative ag or whatever you want to call it, you can see how once man interacts with that animal on the arable land, it becomes a force multiplier and it creates abundance. And that's really lost on our culture today, because everything comes in a plastic package from a warehouse that's highly processed, so people don't even understand like how food originates. And that's what's really important about this bison documentary, and learning why was this land so fertile, where did all this opportunity come from. And because that the only thing that's going to curve this path we're on is knowledge and education. And it's great that you're taking the time to time capsule and document this history that's systematically being erased.
Yeah, and like you said, the education side of it is one of the most important things we could all do right now, because there's so much miseducation coming
Mhm.
out. I mean, I literally read things every day where you have people wanting to just, remove animals from places like the Front Range of Colorado. And what they don't realize is that when they do that, that entire area will slowly turn into a desert, because
Yeah.
you have to have when you're in those dry environments, which is a good swath of the center of America, where it's often too dry for the vegetation to break down itself. So you need the moisture in the rumen of that animal to be able to break it down, turn it into fresh soil. So without these animals, it would perish pretty much. And a lot of it, people want to, stop people from ranching. I mean, that's the kind of their end goal. But as people, we've been given the knowledge to be able to understand how these systems work, and make it work, like you said, in abundance. And so when you put it all together, um, it's a remarkable system. I mean, we've been agrarians for thousands of years. Even a lot of the Native American communities here in the United States were agrarians. There were a few that moved from place to place, but then there were many, especially in the Southeast, that were agrarian cultures. They grew crops, they grew food, and they had knowledge of how to do that to make it work, to the best of their abilities for the land and for them. And that's knowledge that we all have today. And people often talk about, in the film, combining Western knowledge with indigenous knowledge to really kind of understand how all that comes together. And you know, it's a pretty remarkable story if you think about
Yeah,
it.
what's even neater, once again, going back to this regenerative agriculture, holistic management, or what have you, we have all these crises, and they're using pseudoscience to basically deconstruct their they, them, and those, the oligarchy, or however you want to reference them. They're totally fine with transnational corporations like consolidating and buying up all the beef processing and chickens and pigs and all that stuff. But they want to use these crises, whether or not they're even crises or not, to penalize and dissemble the average average farmer, the backyard farmer or the small scale farmer. And what we actually see is, they'll complain about PFAS and forever chemicals or microplastics, but what we're seeing with people that are actually doing the work and are involved with regenerative ag, that for example, with soil biome, these forever chemicals between biochar and proper soil food web, these forever chemicals are either getting sequestered or are being deconstructed. And the same thing with the microplastics. Like, this stuff is getting broken down and reabsorbed back into the environment. And so it's not like a permanent thing that the soil is permanently destroyed. And so we need the government to buy it so that they can do what they do best, is like just make it a Bedouin wasteland or whatever. But there's real solutions to these problems. And if we can just educate people, and then if we can maintain some semblance of liberty to put these things into practice instead of getting absorbed into some kind of like 15-minute city prison planet thing where we just are literally not capable by restriction, by legislation, by bureaucratic gobbledygook. That's why the education component is so important.
Yeah, well, what they've been doing in Maine, and I've heard it could be happening in other states as well, is they've been telling farmers you can't farm your land because we've detected, the small amount of PFAS there, and so we're going to offer to buy that land back from you, or you can just sit on it for 10 years. But nobody is going to be better at mitigating that soil than a farmer. And it's not like these chemicals haven't been there and they just showed up one day. They've been a part of this for a while. The knowledge is coming out on it, and I think it's being used in a similar way that they've used CO2. It's an invisible thing. People get afraid of it, and they can literally walk in and shut down somebody from operating their farm, their private business, because of it, because the community's so afraid of it. But it's kind of ridiculous because we cook on Teflon pans. We do a lot of they're now saying forever chemicals are in Band-Aids. So it's ridiculous to go in and shut down these farms, but that's what they've been doing. And there's a similar situation in Denver right now. There's a bill it's a People's Initiative bill that's going on the 2024 ballot, where they're going to shut down a slaughterhouse. That slaughterhouse is one of the largest slaughterhouses for sheep. And we all know that we can't just take our animals anywhere we want to. You either go through one of these big meat companies, or you wait in line for a couple of years to get an animal at your local facility. So this is, I believe it's Superior Farms is the brand of the meat company that they're trying to shut down. But if you think about how many small sheep farmers there are that feed into that particular plant in Denver, they would have an impact on every single one of those farmers. And they pitch it as these are industrial farmers. They make you envision a CAFO. They don't want you to see these sheep wandering the hills the way that they actually are. And they also pitch it as the slaughterhouse is creating this particular zip code is one of the most polluted zip codes in the US, which is true. But they're making it sound like it's because of the slaughterhouse, which it isn't. The chemicals that are in the ground, it's a super fun site, I think is what they call it, but they've been there since the 1800s. And so, you have to ask the question, okay, is it worth it to shut this facility down and all these farmers all around? It's not going to change what's in the ground there, but then they want to build an inclusive city in its place, a mixed use development. And once they force them out of business, force somebody out of their private business, they want to then go in and develop it. but the chemicals that are in that what makes that place so polluted is the fact that you have I-70 and I-25 both running through the neighborhood, and then you've got this super fund of chemicals that are in the ground from years of industrial manufacturing. In my perspective, it might be better to leave the slaughterhouse in that area, and because you don't want to move these things around and have things popping up all over the country that would be causing environmental waste. But the slaughterhouse is not what has caused that problem, and the waste doesn't even compare to some of the other industrial facilities that are in there. The other thing I've noticed about stuff like this is in that bill, they say it's not okay to kill animals for food, but it is okay to kill animals for animal testing. And this is coming from an animal rights group. So it kind of gives you a direction on their motive and who's funding them,
Yeah. Yeah, it's incredible. And what's even more fascinating, right, is like when you show people the nefariousness of these different bills and everything, right? You're fear mongering, right? You're this tinfoil hat conspiracy realist, right? And you're fear mongering. Meanwhile, they're saying, well, forever chemicals are in band-aids and band-aids are killing us. So
yeah. I mean, it's true. They're saying it could, band-aids can now cause cancer. I cut myself a lot, so I mean, I wear a lot of bandages.
But you're the fear monger because you're pointing out what the bureaucracy is doing to literally destroy the incomes, one, to remove historical people, take away people's lands that they've inherited as a legacy, as like a family legacy. They've inherited this, and we're having hard enough problems with farmers just staying in the industry to produce food to feed the 8 billion people. But at the same time, they're systematically trying to destroy all the farms. Problem, reaction, solution. They're making the problem worse so that they can come up with some technocratic solution that involves a large commercial warehouse, and we're going to grow bugs for protein, and we're going to lab print meat, and don't worry, everything's going to be okay. And we just stole Joe's property from him. I mean, cows are bad, and the solution is to grow crickets in a warehouse and eat lab printed meat.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it also, you have to look at some of this and realize that it comes down to money for a lot of these people. I mean, if you have a patented food product, so you're lab growing some meat, you patent that so nobody else can do it. You no longer need a farmer. You don't have to worry about dealing with hundreds of different farmers that are feeding your food processing facility. You control the whole thing and you get all the profits, and nobody else can recreate what you've created because you've thrown a patent on it. Same goes with some of these bug alternative bug proteins that they're coming out with. All of it is consolidating and removing the necessity of having to have people managing the land across our country, which, if you look at the BLM program, somebody gave me a hard time about that the other day, because they were like, ranchers just want to utilize this land for free and profit off of it. But the truth is that if we were, as taxpayers, to manage all of that land, it would cost us a considerable amount of money each year, more than a lot of people understand. My dad's a land planner, and the numbers that they put on managing wildlands in America are actually pretty huge. So when you consider what those ranchers are doing, they're paying to use the land to the government, and then they're managing it with ruminants that would have originally been out there managing that land. It's a system that works. It's beneficial to everybody. And I mean, it's just the way that, I think we need to have a little more education around all of this stuff so people understand how it fits together. I forgot where I was going with that, but
Well, it's fascinating because just like you were saying, BLM, one, they took this land unconstitutionally, for lack of better, like for a longer argument or whatever. And it is kind of incredible. Hey, if we let these ranchers graze it and utilize it, it's going to maintain it, it's going to improve it. Okay. So the land is going to be managed, for lack of a better term, relatively free. The rancher, in turn, is getting fodder to grow his cow out. The cow then gets slaughtered to feed the community. And it is a literally, like, a relatively speaking, a perfect system that's completely natural, that is creates abundance versus no the other thing I really love is, how we're going to fix this? Kill all the animals. Like, we should just kill the animals and bury them in a hole. Like, where's PETA? Like,
There was a animal rights activist who was making the argument that, because somebody was asking her, well, what's going to happen to all the cows if there's not an economically viable system behind managing them and caring for them? And her answer was, well, they're domestic animals. We created them. They don't need to exist anyway. And,
wow.
apparently nobody's ever explained to her where heritage breeds come from, or,
Yeah.
going back into time. But that was the actual perspective of this, forget her name, but she runs a large vegan movement, or at least she did several
Mhm.
years ago when I found that quote. But she literally just felt they didn't have a reason, a place on our earth. I mean, that's not animal rights, that's not animal welfare, that's something else. I don't even know what you'd put on it.
Yeah, and these same people really don't think that any of us should exist or have rights to live, which is why we have to reduce the population to this Malthusian level of sustainability. And that's the same thing, like with all their code words, sustainability. It's always the opposite. The code word is sustainability. The definition is destroy everything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of the words have been overused over the years. My wife and I were just talking about this the other day, because on our logo currently it says regenerative, sustainable, and humane, but every single one of those words has been overused and abused and has many different meanings now, that it's like we need a new tagline or something.
Yeah. Yeah. We need to redefine a new word for the new dictionary.
Yeah.
And that's how they do it, though, right? They just, well, we take a good word, we'll redefine it for our cause. And then what that does is that erases history. Because now if you go back and you read a book from 50 years ago and it says regenerable, sustainable, well, now that word means something completely different, or maybe the exact opposite. So that's how you can literally burn a book without lighting a match. Just continue to redefine the words.
Well, and I
But
think that in many ways it feels like that's what's happening to our agrarian society right now, is they're trying to burn the book on it.
mhm.
And in that transition, replace it with all of these other patented food products. And you know we just had the state of Tennessee have to pass a law that said if you put mRNA vaccines in your food, it has to be labeled as a pharmaceutical. And that's because they're actually doing this now. I mean, there was a
Wow.
case where they had grown a corn crop to with a vaccine in it for hogs. And then after the corn crop had been harvested, that vaccine had somehow transferred to soybeans, which were supposed to go to people.
Well,
They caught it and had to kill or get rid of about 500 bushels or so. So with this food transition away from natural foods, what you and I want to eat, we're also seeing this metamorphosis of these creations that are being planted in mass. It's not just in a lab anymore. It's actually out there, to the point where you have to have a state pass a bill that says you're going to have to label that food as a pharmaceutical in our state. But and you were talking a little bit ago about controlling some of the farmers. When we look at the money generation that comes out of some of these narratives, and you look at this, moving towards green energy and forcing farmers to upgrade to certain electrical equipment and upgrade their farms, it's putting all of those farmers, those larger farmers that are supplying the system, into a great deal of debt to the banks by forcing them. And they force them because if you want to get a loan, a lot of these banks are aligned with a global agenda to basically say, we're not going to lend you money unless you make these upgrades. And so for those large industrial farms to stay in production, they then have to go through these upgrades to be able to get their operating loans from the banks. And it basically creates a new debt system of putting these people into debt, enslaving them to further control. And that is why you had about over a dozen agricultural commissioners write letters, not to our representatives, but to the banks, saying, hey, look, you're going to disrupt our entire country's food supply by forcing these guys to do this. But that stuff is happening every day across this country and around the world. I mean, that's why you have farmers protesting in Europe right now.
That's what I think makes these topics way more relevant is, your average troll or talking pointer or agenda or propagandist, whether it's some PETA person or whatever, they can say all these platitudes or these talking points, but these approaches have already been implemented across the planet. And we see the impact of it, the negative impact of it. So it's not like, oh, this might happen. No, look, they did this over here. Look, they already did this in the Netherlands, and look at the result, so it's not like we're trying to guess or, once again, like, oh, you're being a fear monger by saying, well, this could potentially do this. No, this is the agenda. It is a global agenda. There are transnational corporations involved. There is this banking cartel that's clearly involved. And the end game is that you will own nothing and somehow be happy. And and what's that all look like? How does that work? How could that be possible? Well, we're watching it, we're watching it, and they'll take away the dirt a square inch at a time. They'll take away our freedom and our liberty an inch at a time. They'll take away natural. It's so weird. Like, it's so 1984 that we have to have this conversation about natural food. Like, for one, the term food, like, it should be, jumbo shrimp. Like, no, this is like, food should be natural and we should want natural food. And if food ceases to be natural, I would say that it ceases to be food. But the solution is an mRNA soybean.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. If you look at it, I mean, this has actually happened throughout history. If you look at our obsession with grains and processed foods, it goes way back. And it does have moving away from what our bodies were designed to eat does have consequences. And you can see that in filming our bison documentary. We've been to numerous Native American reservations across the United States. And what happened with them was their food supply was literally wiped out by the government. That's part of the bison story, is that they were wiped out to control their food supply. And then they were given grain rations and other things that they had to create food from that would be then more processed than what their bodies were able to handle. And as a result, you've seen all sorts of health impacts, depression and other issues come out from within those communities. And, it's almost like if you look at that, that's a very small scale compared to what they're trying to do now on a much larger scale. I mean, and they're succeeding at it because they've gotten everybody to believe that if we don't do this, we're going to hit some sort of apocalyptic scenario because of the gas of life being out of balance or something like that. Yeah. So, I mean, the Netherlands people think this is a conspiracy theory. The first time I showed somebody the World Economic Forum website, they thought it was a fake organization, right? Because it seems that so far out of whack, but
Is it
they are
because
real.
their talking head sounds like Dr. Evil and dresses like some intergalactic comic book arc enemy?
It could be. I mean, they almost make it seem unbelievable. It's so real.
Yeah.
I mean, really, if you look at, you know, the global picture right now, the UN is really kind of the propaganda tool, and the WEF is the economic side of
Yeah.
that. They're the ones implementing these things. But when you look at the Netherlands, they wanted to make the Netherlands one of the new WEF food hubs. It just happens that the Netherlands also feeds a lot of Europe. I mean, they used to produce most of the food for Europe. So it's the perfect, opportunity. And if you look at the Netherlands now, they've got, some of the largest alternative protein plants going up. It's completely changed. They are succeeding at what they said they wanted to do. So it's not like, these are conspiracy theories or things that aren't happening. They actually are happening. These are plans that some people that none of us elected. I mean, we don't have a vote in the UN or the WEF, but they've come up with these ideas, and they're implementing them, and they're impacting people on a global scale. And then they get away with it because they've convinced a lot of people that if we don't do this, we don't make these sacrifices and these transitions, that we're going to burn up in a few years, which none of that's going to make a difference.
And it's fascinating, like even like you were mentioning the Seminole Indians, right? I mean, the Native Americans. And I think of the Seminoles and how that there is so much talk of heritage and all these different things. And like we have all these different heritage months, and we're trying to maintain this heritage. But the solution for the Seminoles is the Hard Rock Casino, so they can generate all this revenue, other than historically all of the wisdom that they had with animals and growing food and all these heritage type historical facts. That's all, hang all that junk. That's all stupid. The solution for the Seminoles is they need to buy Wall Street, own the Hard Rock Casino, and then get dividends and all this. I mean, it's so, if it wasn't real, it would just seem so fake, but that's the solution. It's so bizarre. I mean, it's very, very strange.
Well,
world.
Somebody told us, we were on the Wind River Reservation. He said that politics in the Native American community make Democrats and Republicans look tame. But basically, I mean, you do have, I think, everywhere you've got different viewpoints. There are groups that are out there that are working, and they're the ones that we've worked with every day to try and bring their traditions back to their young ones. But even they will tell you, when we introduce the idea of, growing community gardens on the reservation and these things, and that they had a lot of negative reactions, because there are a lot of people who have been, trained otherwise. So it's almost, I mean, they're fighting the same battle right now that you and I are, as far as, hey, we need to get back to our traditional ways or traditional values. Look how it's impacting us. But it's sad, but at least, if you can see what has happened there, and you can see how it's being implemented on a larger scale now. I mean, hopefully people will wake up to it and realize that, the direction we're being led is not healthy for us. It's not better for us. And, destroying these operations that raise animals across our country is not going to help the ecosystem. If anything, it will destroy areas of it. I mean, Alan Savory discovered his philosophy by visiting a national park that didn't have any animals in it. So
yeah, that's right. Yeah, and what's so interesting is just the the fact that you can observe, we moved from the Northeast 10 years ago, and for whatever reason, we felt a really strong call to live a more simple agrarian type lifestyle. And I talk about it all the time on the podcast and on the channel about uh, living an intentional, slower lifestyle, void of hyper consumerism. I read the book The Millionaire Next Door, and it kind of changed my thinking on a lot of things, and basically the crux of the book is about hyper consumerism and a debt based economy,
Yeah, I
and
read that book when I was 14.
yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, it was a great book. But no, I think, for a lot of people, in our case, we weren't looking for it. We were kind of forced into it, saying, "Hey, look, this is now going to be your lifestyle. Forget the corporate world you came from. This is it." And I think it takes a lot of sacrifice for a lot of people. It takes a lot of adjusting. You're not going to be able to go out and you know do the things that you used to do to entertain yourself, and you're going to have to sacrifice entertainment altogether just to manage
hmm
your life. But for centuries, you know, up until recent modern times, people have had to work for their food. They've
yeah,
had to put the effort in to get something out of it. It's only been a modern scenario where, and I think it will end up being a very short time in history where food was so inexpensive it was less than 25% of your budget or
mhm,
15% of your budget for a lot of people. Now we're starting to see that change again,
yeah,
and there was a point in time where all you did all day long was work to be able to feed yourself, just like
y-
every other species on this planet.
yep,
So it's a bit of a break from reality. And I think that there's there's an obsession that has built of, of these distractions that really, if you think about it in life, don't mean a dang thing.
yep,
It's like you're mentioning the Seminoles with the casinos. How important is that compared to teaching your kids your old ways of how to hunt,
mhm,
how to preserve food, um, and that's where I look at things today and I'm like, I mean, even with our kids, we do the best we can to share with them this lifestyle, but I mean, some of them are just way too distracted. I mean, they grow up with a cell phone.
yep. So, okay, so you were kind of, for lack of a better term, forced into this lifestyle. So, do you regret it?
Oh no, absolutely not. I guess when I say the word forced, it was, we didn't have
Sure.
any other choice. We were
Yeah,
put in a position
yeah.
where we had to reinvent
Reinvest.
ourselves. And,
Sure.
I think we're
Why don't
all
you
led. What was that?
why don't you regret it? Because this obviously, obviously you guys were going down one path and you were doing this corporate thing, and then the circumstance changed, and here you are. So, I think it's a great illustration because we kind of chose to do this, you know what I mean? And we saw it as a necessity, but now you're coming from a little different angle, and it was you didn't really have a choice and you were kind of forced into it. So why don't you regret it?
Well, um, for the overall picture, it's a lot more rewarding. I mean,
Exactly.
our lives are a lot happier now, a lot less stressful than they were. Even if we go through periods of time where we feel flat broke, we're not stressed out about it because
Yeah.
we know that we have everything that we need to have. But um, there when we moved out to our farm, if there was something we needed, if there was a piece of equipment that broke, we just went out and bought a new one because that's what we did. Now, if something breaks
Mhm.
in less amount of time without having to, spend a lot of effort earning the money to go buy something, we can walk out there and fix it because we're a lot more knowledgeable. So I think, for us, it was a challenge at first because we had to learn a lot. But as time has gone by, the more that we've learned. The health benefits of eating raw foods
Yeah.
and milk and things like that we've picked up from getting away from. I mean, it's like I for us, the first time we took an egg off our farm and cracked it into the skillet, we were seeing who was going to eat it first, because it was just a
Mhm.
weird thing to us.
Yeah.
Now we it's a normal thing, it's normal to eat food that comes right off the farm, right from an animal. But it was actually, we were scared of it at first, like, is something going to be wrong with it? But um, I would say that overall we feel healthier, we're happier, we have more time, we spend almost all of our time with our kids. I mean, our kids are homeschooled. They still socialize. That's
Mhm. Of
people who
course.
think homeschool kids aren't socialized have never, been a part of the community, but they have friends, they go out, they socialize. We're more engaged with our community because we have more time to be engaged. So after that tough transition of kind of being forced into economic decline, having to climb out and learn how to do things on our own, we've come out on the other side more free than we ever were before. I mean, before we used, my wife and I both used to make a lot of money, but
Mhm.
we felt like we were enslaved to that lifestyle, and it was stressful.
And the reason, my take on that, I was a financial planner for 11 years, and my take on that is that corporate concrete jungle sidewalk lifestyle is completely synthetic. It's completely unsustainable. It's relatively, what you find retrospectively is it's empty, right? And now what are you saying? Oh, before, if the tractor broke, well, we would just buy a new one, right? But now talk about sustainability and resiliency. Now you have the knowledge to go out and fix it, right? And that is sustainable. That is I mean, in a very real way, I realize everybody can't grow their own food. I realize, but we do all need each other. And so the people that can't grow their own food better wake up and realize that they better meet somebody that can grow their food for them, unless they want to eat like government soy kibble or whatever it's going to be, whatever the new cricket flavored Funko Pop or whatever. But, you know, we need to support each other, and just learning these life skills. I mean, the dividends are certainly not monetary, but holistically as a lifestyle and well-being. And I mean, how much is your health worth? I mean, how much is just feeling better and having more energy and being able to spend more time with your family and train your own children and teach them your core values rather than some government propaganda institution, like brainwashing them to be a good cog in the transnational machine. There's so much value that it's, you cannot put a monetary number on it.
Well, that's the other thing too, is you mentioned monetary sustainability. Everything that we're talking about is real.
Yeah.
It's tangible, it's real. When you think about money and currency in general, it's all fake.
Yeah.
It's based on people's perception that a dollar bill has value. And we're seeing that perception die every single day. I mean, eventually that focus it's not going to be around, and it's not going to matter how many dollar bills you have in your bank account if nobody wants to accept them, if they want to barter and trade for something instead because the dollar has no value. What worth do you have in that capacity? But we've all become a slave to the concept of currency. And the more you learn to do on your own, the more food you grow, the less you rely on that currency to sustain you. Um, and in many ways, the wealthier you become because your resources become more abundant. So it's an interesting concept, but I have come to the conclusion over the years that currency is just an illusion, and it's one that we've all bought into and
Mhm.
we've become enslaved to because we have to pay our taxes in that currency. We're forced to trade in that currency. And now they're trying to digitalize it to control it even more. I mean, it has always been
Right.
from its very beginning a mechanism to control the populace.
Yeah.
So, what we're talking about when we're talking about spending time with the family, having knowledge and skills, being able to grow our own food, that type of lifestyle, that's all real. That's an
Yeah.
investment that nobody's going to be able to destroy or is going to fall apart when society realizes, oh, this paper has no intrinsic value anymore.
Yeah, and I still work in an office 4 days a week, and we grow a lot of chicken eggs, and I'll take my eggs in to the office, and the guys buy them from me for $5 a dozen, and it's way better than what they can buy in the store. And it's offsetting my feed bill. I'm providing them with a high quality product. And how much and this goes back to my point of knowing your farmer, shaking a rancher's hand, um, is how, I mean, one, that part is so fulfilling to be able to provide something to somebody else and they appreciate it. And it's so part of this real transaction versus going to Walmart in some, cold box and pulling out a dozen eggs that came from who knows where that have been refrigerated for how knows long. Like, it's just like, but then to be in this real world with real interaction, real knowledge and tangible stuff, like that's my exact point, is like, I think if you're outside of that, you are in a synthetic, all these like Elon Musk, they want to talk about simulation theory, and maybe we're all just in a simulation. My contention is, if you're living in an artificial life that's on concrete and it's in a high rise, like 90 stories high, like, I think you are in a simulation. I think it's completely synthetic. It's a total derivative of the real world. But the reality that maybe you are in that high rise, right? If you're living in that synthetic derivative, a derivative is a derivative of something. And when you erase that something, when you erase that real world, the derivative will cease to exist.
Yeah. Sometimes I think that we're living in a simulation of freedom that they're slowly trying to take back too.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. No, that's absolutely true.
I mean, if you look at at the same time we've seen this attack on farming, homesteading, agriculture, we've also seen this attack on our freedoms of speech or our communication, like you and I were talking about earlier. Just censorship, and they use economic, penalties to be able to censor people, to silence them, make sure that they can't continue to use their voices. But that's been, it's a fascinating thing. My wife and I have a conversation all the time. Was, America ever truly freed, or was it just some sort of simulation that now they're trying to take back? But
Yeah.
I mean, it's also one of those things you start to value more when you do take a step outside of society and you start to recognize, all that life actually has to offer. You certainly, I think, value that freedom a lot more than you do in a high rise.
Yeah, and you just value all the real tangible things of life. Like that first egg you cracked into that pan. You're like, well, I know where this egg came from. I know what the chicken that laid it. I know what they ate. I know, how they're treated. I know how they're managed. So, relatively speaking, and that's what's so weird about the synthetic society, is like, nobody, I mean, you buy that carton of eggs at Walmart, or you go to that restaurant, right? And the egg comes out in your plate, and nobody is like, oh, I wonder where that came from. I wonder who touched it. I wonder how they cooked it, and all these different things, right? All these different factors. But taking that control back and knowing, growing the egg and collecting the egg and cracking it, there's, and there's an inordinate amount of mental illness and everything's in society today. And I think that a large percentage of it is because of this synthetic derivative type lifestyle that is not connected to anything real. And so of course it'll create schizophrenia and, delusional, whatever. I mean, it's a psychological, um, it creates psychological damage to your brain, just being disconnected.
Yeah, I could see that. And the other thing is that food that pops out on your plate in restaurants, the food you grab in grocery stores, nobody questions it. And it gives, in my perspective, the regulatory bodies even more control, because people feel that they can eat these things safely and nothing's going to happen to them.
Exactly right.
But the more research you do on the ingredients of the things you buy in the store, the more research you do on, the chemicals put into the animals that are, being served in the store shelves, the more you realize that that food is not safe, but then, it's like I said, when we moved out to the country, we got some chickens. The first time we, had an egg, we went through the same experience. First time we harvested a rabbit, we were just kind of like, can we eat it? Is it real food? And that's, that's the brainwashing that's happened over the years. Whereas that food is way safer than anything you're going to get off of a grocery store shelf. I mean, if you're worried about things, if you're worried about what you're eating, look into some of those ingredients that, the synthetic chemicals that you see on the labels of the packaging. I mean, none of that is real. Our bodies don't break it down the way that we do the real, proteins and things that we need. But
yeah, same thing as seed oils. Seed oils is an experiment, is a post World War I experiment. Crisco, I think, was track grease on like World War I tanks, and then they converted it into a food product. And we have been this seed oil experiment of like, and I encourage everybody to look into seed oils, because it is what's killing most people. And it's a product of this highly processed food process. And I mean, we have no idea of the long-term ramifications, because 100 years ago, these seed oils didn't even exist. We certainly didn't consume them. And now they are in everything, everything remotely.
Yeah, that's my wife has outlawed seed oils in our house for a few years now.
Yeah,
but
they're scary.
Yeah, they're not consumable, but we do it anyway. They tend to sit in the belly.
This has been a great conversation, Charlie. So our listeners know, where can everybody find you? Where can they get your information?
Well, we've got our YouTube channel, Yanasa TV. We also, our nonprofit is called Meet My Neighbor Productions. That has its own YouTube channel. That's just, it just has agriculture and videos from us filming farms. If you want commentary and conversations like this, Yanasa TV. And those are where you can find us right now. We've been hoping to expand and do more things, but with the bison documentary the last several years, it's tied up a lot of our time. We've been all across the country in Canada filming that. So we've just kind of stuck to those two main avenues for now.
Great. Well, I really appreciate the information you put out, and it's incredibly relevant, and it definitely impacts us. And I think it's really important. And I think this whole educational component of just educating people. And then, I commend you for homeschooling your children. If anything is going to change anything for better in this American society, or dare I say around the world, is people taking control of the education and training of their own children. And then these kids are going to grow up. They're going to make up their own mind. They're going to make their own decisions. But at a minimum, at least we aren't outsourcing their education to who knows what and what knows what. And so I greatly appreciate that.
Yep. We, I mean, I will say with homeschooling, that's another thing that people are afraid to do. Your kids learn 10 times better in an environment where it's coming naturally to them than they do in a school environment. Our 14-year-old was failing in the public school system, way behind. I mean, and to be behind in the public school system now is to really be behind, because every kid is behind. So since we've been uh, homeschooling him, he has gotten ahead and he scores at the top of his grade points. And you would think as a parent, you're worried because they're sitting there
Mhm.
doing work and you're trying to help them out the best you can, but you're not a teacher. But then you realize at the end of the day that the environment you've put them in is more natural for them to be able to learn and retain the information. And they thrive. And you can control what information it is you're giving them, and you're not feeding them. There are classes, like an entire hour spent in school on stuff that kids really shouldn't even be learning about. We shouldn't
Yeah.
be exposing them to until they're, much older, but they do it.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating. It goes right back into our topic, right? Like, well, I can't grow my own food. I'm not a farmer, right? Well, you can try, and it's the same thing with training your own children, especially with all the tools we have today. What you do is when you try, you'll find out that they're much happier. You're much happier. They're getting a much broader, better education in an incredibly much shorter period of time to now they have more free time, they have more peace of mind, they have more lifestyle, all these things that everybody talks about that we want. And that's what homeschooling and an agrarian lifestyle, I think they kind of fit hand in hand. And it's great to just hear people that are taking control of their food and taking control of the educational component, because that it's the only way that anything's going to be fixed. If we just keep farming out our food and if we keep farming out our kids, we're going to end up in a complete dystopia.
I think we almost are.
So we are the resistance. So if you are listening to this transmission, you are the resistance. Thank you so much
Right.
for watching today, y'all. Charlie, thank you for your time. Thanks for coming on. And remember, y'all, stay fearless, my friends.